Hello? Hello? Can you hear me now? Why is my desktop audio not working? You're watery. You're underwater. Yes. I can't hear me though.
that um that Preluki was bombed. So I'm not,
Okay, we can hear again. Excellent.
and
Did
5 people have died.
I did not know that yet. I didn't get that report.
Well, it just happened. And
Yeah.
you probably won't get that report because it's a relatively minor place. Five
Uh,
people are dead.
OBS decided to upset all of our sound system again, so that's fun. Did I change the thing? I did not. Okay, so that went well. I guess we won't be getting the thing. I'll play the music for you at the end. It'll be fun. I found a great, I found a great remix of Vivaldi's Winter, and I know it's summer and all that, but I liked it a lot, so we're gonna use that. All right. That actually, well, let's put a pin in the attack on Perluki for a second. Uh, Hi. How is everybody? Hello, two guys. I have a simple question. In World War II, there was a lead polka dot B-24 Liberator to escort the bombing parties, and RTB when the formation was airborne. What was is up with the tires? I would have to look into that off the top of my head. Do you know what specific airbase that was, and what air wing had that particular bomber launched out of it? Because that would help immensely in finding it. Polka dot B-24. It helps if I spell things correctly. First Sergeant, the B
Fuck.
24, the 458th Bombardment Group. If you're going to be reading the news on Perluki, mute yourself for a minute.
Yeah, I will.
Polka dot paint scheme. B 24 was destroyed on May 27th, 1944, in a flare accident. It looks like this was a bomber. Yeah, this was a bomber that just flew to make sure the rest of the bombers got in formation. As for the tires, the only thing weird I see on this is here, let me put it up here. Boop. The only thing weird I see on this in particular is the star on the front landing wheel, which is probably just, a hub decoration. But the polka dot would be easy to see for all the bombers that are lining up, particularly in the light, which American bomber formations would use. So yeah, yeah, this is just a this bomber in particular would have been used for like aligning the formation. Hello, can you? We're having OBS problems. Give me a second. Uh, 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 uh. Yeah, all right. That should be about normal. All right. While we're waiting for Hetman to finish reading about an airstrike in Ukraine, I wanted to bring up Bad Empanada because he was brought to my attention. Unfortunately, it's not that I don't know about him; it's that I tried my best to ignore him and any given possibility because he's an idiot. He For example, he is, as you will see if you're reading here, a supporter of Russia's invasion of Ukraine because he's a base tanky with no real idea of how the world works. And so Detestable Taco several days ago made a comment online on air or here on his posts in YouTube that I found particularly stupid. He said, contrasting Russia and Israel makes it incredibly obvious that Israel is intentionally targeting civilians. When Russia launches widespread airstrikes, they hit hundreds of different targets and kill 14 civilians. Oh, check. 1 second. Yes, the mic is facing me. It's right in my face. Yeah, is your volume down? Is anybody else having a really hard time hearing me?
I hear you fine. Yeah, this really is not a good situation. I'm trying to see if my friends are okay.
At any rate, contrasting, while Russia launches widespread airstrikes, they hit hundreds of different targets and kill 14 civilians. These are still war crimes. The broader pattern of attack indicates that either this was not intentional or that perhaps it was a reckless attack on a target in the residential building with no regard for collateral damage, given the vast majority of other strikes were targeted at facilities of clear military value. No. Israel strikes in Gaza are not like this. They specifically and overwhelmingly directed at housing. If Israel strikes 200 targets, 180 of them are houses and civilian infrastructure. The pattern for them is the opposite. If they hit a military target, it's safer to assume they did so by accident. There's problems with this. The first and most immediate one is that Ukraine has an air defense network. They have radar. They have SAMs. They have AAA. They have the ability to attack targets that attack them. They have the ability to shoot down missiles and drones. So, like, almost immediately, you have a situation where Ukraine has defenses and Gaza does not. Secondly, I would point out that Gaza is being bombed by fighters that are taking off, flying over them, and bombing them. Like, there's nothing to stop the Israelis from flying right over your house and dropping a bomb on you if you live in Gaza. Since about the beginning of the war, not necessarily the first few weeks, but the beginning of the war, a standoff between the Ukrainian Air Force and Air Defense and Russia's Air Force and Air Defense has occurred. Basically, it's prohibitively dangerous for either side to cross into territory controlled by the other side's air defense. This means that Russia has switched to a pattern of launching strikes at long range. And in short, it's much more difficult for them to hit things. If you know how modern fighter planes work, they have what's called lead computing bomb sites. So the computer on the airplane will calculate where the nose of the aircraft is, how it is moving, and where the bombs will fall when you release them from that. And that's how pilots aim bombs. Russia is firing off missiles into the void. Some get shot down, some don't, some hit targets. Most of them are targeted relatively indiscriminately. But the Ukrainians have a particular advantage that because they have radar and because they have air defenses, they see the attack coming. And so they have time
Yeah,
to
they have a
move
lot more
people.
resources at their disposal to detect these attacks. That's
And
one reason why not so many of them are dying. Also, Russia just simply doesn't have the means to do fully what they intend. But as we have seen today, they can do a hell of a lot, even with what little that they have. And yeah, I'm trying to figure out what the fuck they were targeting there. Anyway, I'll be in and out of this podcast, so just bear with me.
yes, as I was saying, they Ukrainians have more time to react, more time to get the shelters, to take cover that the Gazans simply do not have. And so, like, there's already a material difference here that he's not accounting for. Um, and there's the second material issue that I think is important, that, like, unintentional attacks are not war crimes. If you unintentionally hit civilians, it's sad, it's not good, but it's not a war crime. So making this distinction kind of shows that Bad Empanada doesn't understand how war crimes work. And I wanted to start this tonight because we have had a lot of discussion in the last few days of a number of events. And the first is Operation Spiderweb by the Ukrainians. Um, I don't have such a rosy outlook on this, and Hetman doesn't either. We talked about it prior to this. If you aren't aware, Ukraine spent the better part of a year and a half orchestrating a remote drone strike and smuggling drones into Russia. And 2 days ago, they unleashed those drones, and they did a significant amount of damage to a number of bombers and AWAC aircraft on tarmacs in Russian air bases. 4 air bases were targeted. The exact number of planes damaged or destroyed is still up in the air. However, it was a fairly significant morale victory for Ukraine that has not had many lately. Additionally, the following day, they launched a strike underwater on the Kerch Strait Bridge and caused some damage to it. It was minorly damaged. Vehicles were still driving over it. Whether or not that's an indication of the bridge's viability is hard to say because the Russians need this bridge badly. It's 50% of their supplies running into Ukraine come over that bridge. So in short, Ukraine got a number of very visible wins. A lot was made of this. The planes that were hit were mainstays and backfires and Tu-95 Bears. And these are all strategic bombers or AWACS planes. Russia is no longer building them. The production lines are shut down. And so these are not losses they can replace. And while that is, to a certain extent, significant, that is hardly the only weapons that Ukraine is being bombarded with on a daily basis. So a lot of this, I think there is reason to not necessarily celebrate, but there is reason to be optimistic about how that situation is unfolding, at least in part. This does significant damage to Russia's long-term strategic air capabilities. AWACS in particular are vital coordination aircraft. They're the aircraft with the radar domes on top. They are used to detect and coordinate other aircraft. So, in truth, the strike is significant in this regard that they penetrated Russian security, and they did significant damage. But the same day, Russia launched strikes on 3 cities: Odessa, Kharkiv, and the third one I forget. But there were 3 cities. And the weapons that Ukraine is getting hit with are things like the Shahed loitering munitions, sometimes called kamikaze drones. And they're getting shot at by surplus S-300 missiles. And so, as heartening as it is to see Ukraine fighting back, in the short term, I'm afraid it hasn't done as nearly as much as people think it has. So, when we look at these kinds of strikes, we have to kind of take into account what are you gaining from the operation versus what have you expended to achieve this operation. And while the drones themselves are pretty cheap and the trucks are obviously fairly cheap, the operation in of itself required you to put these resources into Russia, to smuggle them into place, which required people, and it required a significant amount of time. 18 months, I read that number, and I kind of got flabbergasted. That's a long time to hit 4 air bases. That's a lot of investment of manpower, man hours, and money. And this kind of follows a pattern of behavior for the Ukrainians that I find disturbing in the terms of them winning their war, because they have this habit of seeking out different areas of conflict, such as invading Kursk, that do not materially contribute to their defense. The other thing they've done
I'm
is,
back and I'm listening. You're doing a very good job covering it and basically going over my own opinion on the whole situation.
yeah.
Anyway, keep going and I'll put in my 2 cents.
And the other thing I noticed they did that I had some serious questions in particular is they've deployed special forces to places like Africa where they engage Wagner operations in Africa, which materially hurts the oligarchs of Russia, but doesn't really affect their ability to attack Ukraine. And like these are things that are on paper effective. For example, the Ukrainians have been involved in South Sudan and that shit show.
You know what it really suggests to me a lot is that there's not a whole, and it doesn't surprise me one bit from what I know about Ukrainian military structure, power structure, and all of that, is that not a lot of this is done. Like there's a lot of there's a lot of little operations going around independently that don't necessarily that aren't necessarily part of a greater strategic goal. And these are being done from what in what seems to be like they seem to be done without any sort of knowledge of one party to another. And that's a big problem. It suggests actually that a lot of their efforts aren't really coordinated, and like the whole operation in Kursk, it had a minor effect in diverting some forces there, but overall it was a big waste. And the scale of the actual casualties from that operation, I think, are not on the Ukrainian side fully known. And now what really bothers me is that it's resources that could have been spent to fortify the areas, say for example like Sumska Oblast, which is now under threat. Sumy is, I think, 20 miles or less away from Russian positions. So much of that could have been, it was a really poor use of resources. This whole Operation Spiderweb, I think it was very impressive, but strategically, I don't think it's going to have the effect that they intended. And a lot of this is seemingly done for, to show, okay, Ukraine is still relevant, you should fund us. And in reality, them trying to present that to a hostile administration like the Trump administration to try to, garner support, it's not going to do that.
I don't know if that was the aim. I think the aim,
I don't think the aim was there because the preparations for it started,
yes,
prior. That said, the counteroffensive in 2023, which was a huge disaster, was done in such a way out of, largely trying to, show relevance. And, I don't know. I at this point, I think that any sort of effort that can be done defensively should be done.
Yeah, like what I was kind of driving
it's in terms of fortifying positions and making sure everything should be done to make sure those fucking bastards don't take any more territory. And I'm sorry, I'm really in a bad mood. It's hard for me to be objective at this point because it hit an area that I've walked. It hit an area that, it's where my family's from. It hit an area where I have friends. So I'm really right now trying to, account for all of them. And, that I'm angry. I'm angry. A lot of my anger right now, I'm really angry at like, at the RF and really any Russian citizen at this point. But I'm angry with leadership in Ukraine, whether it be political or military, who have made such wasteful efforts. So I don't know. Anyway, Daedalus, continue. I will be here. Just let me go and check.
Yeah, the problem I see is that these operations aren't really designed to advance a strategic goal. The operations designed to hurt Russia, but that, like, unless you're hurting Russia in a way that matters, uh, it doesn't matter. To be frank, uh, I don't know, like, if World War II is the analogy we're reaching for here. I think the analogy we're more reaching for is the Confederacy in the Civil War, and things like uh, Chancellorsville is a really great example. At the Battle of Chancellorsville is considered Robert E. Lee's masterpiece defense of and defeat of T.J. Hooker, and it's a impressive feat if you know the history. Basically, the Confederate Army split itself in half, actually in thirds, but that's beside the point, and ambushed and destroyed a much larger portion of the Army of the Potomac and drove them back across the river. And this is impressive, and people laud the victory as significant to this day. And the question you really have to answer is it? Did you gain anything? Did you stop the Union from coming again? Did you cement your position? And we've talked a little bit on this channel before, in particular, about the levels of warfare, how tactics feeds into operational goals, feeds into strategy. And if you're not executing a coherent strategy, then the other two, everything below that is pointless. And so while this attack is impressive, and it actually probably does more for the United States in the long term than it does for Ukraine, because I'm checking over the conflict map. Uh, the strikes on Perluki haven't been input yet, but there was an earlier strike yesterday morning of 96 Shahad drones in that general vicinity, of which only approximately half were stopped. So Russia is still capable of effectively bombarding all of Ukraine at will, and will remain so unless Ukraine can strike out against Russian forces openly that are launching these drones, launching these bombers, and these SAM sites that are being used in ground attack mode. And there's fighting all along the front, and there's bombardment all along the front, and it is a grinding defense that Ukraine is waging, and in very critical places. Right now, they're losing. Greg talked about, or Hatman talked about Sumi, and there's nothing behind those lines yet to reinforce if they have to fall back. All they can do right now is hope they don't get overrun. So I'm afraid that situation is, well,
So if
impressive.
I send you some images,
Are they
can
combat
you
images?
display them? They're not combat images. They're pictures of the result of the attack. I want people to see what
We will put them up in Discord.
Russia does.
We can put them up in
What?
Discord. We can't put them up on here. We will get spanked by
Okay.
YouTube.
Okay, I'll send them on Discord.
Yeah, well, I'll put them in in our Discord on well, we'll put it in Europe for current events.
I'll probably link. Inevitably, there's going to be some fund for the family. From what I see, 5 people died, including a child who was a year old and 4 months old, and there's going to be something. So I'll get the information for that, and we'll do what we can.
On Discord. 1 second, please. I'm gonna put that on Discord with my phone because I know how to do that faster. Yeah, it will get us at the very least demonetized if we put up combat images. Could you get a translation of that for me, please, so I can put it up?
Yeah, I'll do that. Do you want me to write it? Just tell you right now, or
No, write it out for me so I can paste it.
Right.
No, I am not whispering. What's broken today? Oh. This is turned up as high as it goes. Let's see if something else broke today. I am checking the device manager. 1 second, please. Don't mind the dead air. Don't mind the dead air. Oh, it is low. Okay.
I'm doing the translation just myself, so it's gonna.
Yeah, it'll take a second. I'm working on this anyway.
Yeah.
No, I had to plug in all of these things again after the cleaners came, so it might have reset things that I didn't want reset. Let me check. Da, da, da. All right. Do, 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 do. How about now? Let's see if that fixed it. How about now? Let me know if I fixed anything at all. Is it sound louder at all? Thank you.
All right, just sent you it.
Okay, hang on, I got it. I'm gonna put it up.
The translation is basically like structured in the way it is in Ukrainian. It would take me a little bit to kind of render it properly in English. But everyone will understand it. It's just going to look a little weird.
I am putting it underneath the other thing. All right, the pictures from this and a translation for it are going up on our Discord server. The link should work in the description.
Fuckers.
Where are we? We have spent 32 minutes. Okay. Yes, I found the volume dial on the bottom of my mic, actually. It got moved. With that, I kind of want to pivot because we're only doing an hour again tonight because it's late.
Brown, give me a second.
To Israel and Gaza and this kind of was happening concurrently with the spiderweb operation. Palm Dad band jumped. Band jumped now. Anyway, so if you're still on Twitter, welcome to hell. I've saved you a seat. But if you're still on Twitter, you might have noticed that the pro-Israel Twitter accounts, the big ones, the racist ones, were freaking the fuck out around the same time that Operation Spiderweb happened. Uh, Very early reports came in from a humanitarian site in Gaza, more specifically a Red Cross hospital, that had been set up because Israel has bombed all the other hospitals, that there was a large influx of people who had been shot. And a number of Palestinians relayed to the media that they could that these people who were shot were shot by Israelis while they were attempting to get food at a humanitarian aid station. And everyone started claiming that the media was lying, and then there was no evidence for it, and that it wasn't happening, and that the media was doing a blood libel, and all the things that you have come to expect from the last 2 years or so of this conflict in Gaza. And then they said, well, there's video of these people getting food, and they weren't getting shot at. And then they said Hamas was shooting them. And on it went. And all the usual suspects. Brianna Wu chimed in. She's currently fighting Muin Rabini on Twitter and losing, and it's the most glorious thing you've ever seen in your life. And all of this was this morass of misinformation. And then it happened. The Israelis said, well, it seems that the IDF soldiers fired warning shots into the crowd. And I was flabbergasted because you don't fire warning shots at people, you fire them over people. And so it was already a stunning omission from the IDF. And it's on top of another stunning omission that we talked about earlier last week, where I read out to you a paper and an article from an Israeli newspaper in which they admit that they have done no damage in reality to Hamas, that they've reconstituted themselves and in fact even grown, and that they admit that they have a higher than normal civilian to military casualty ratio in Gaza. And today, in Israel, another particularly remarkable thing has happened. It looks like Netanyahu's government may be on the verge of collapse.
Good.
Um, the ultra orthodox are pulling out over the draft amendments that would have them be subject to the draft.
Predictable, right?
I guess, and more to the point, the polls in Israel have reversed. The Liberal Party looks to be leading by a very slim majority, 60 to about 30, 40 with any other party. The disaster that has unfolded in Gaza is man-made. The Palestinians were being starved. The aid has been cut off for weeks. They have had no food and no water, significant sources of water. And when the aid finally came in, it came in limited numbers, and they had to be biometrically scanned, and they got a limited amount of food. And it was designed in such a way to funnel the Gazans from where they were staying and hiding from the Israelis into areas that they could be controlled and corralled. And then the Israelis started shooting them. This is the second time. These are already starting to be called the Witkoff massacres after the American negotiator for the ceasefire. And it's not Hamas. It's Israel doing this. They starved these people, and now they're shooting at them. And they're like, well, they didn't wait in line properly after they starved them for months. After they gave them not enough food to survive. After they gave like a pound-ish of flour, 5 kilograms, 3-4 pounds of flour, not for whole families that have had nothing in months. Or at least weeks, rather. there is, I think, it's impossible at this point to say, and it's been noted all throughout that there's no real plan that Israel has for Gaza other than wiping out the Palestinians. I don't think anyone can really deny that at this point if they're an objective viewer of the situation. If you're bound and determined to collect that check from APAC, then I guess you could. But looking at this in any real sense, you have to be upset and ashamed. The United States has provided weapons for this. We have skirted our laws for Israel multiple times, and we know it's happening. You read the reports that came out of the end of the Biden administration, and people were trying to desperately make the case that Israel is committing human rights violations with the weapons we send them, but the reports got downplayed. The reality is that we are culpable. Sitting here, we are as culpable because we know what's happening. We see it happening. There's no getting around it. And this is there's a phrase you see that goes around on Twitter and other spaces where pro-Israeli accounts exist. No Jews, no news, and they compare other conflicts like the Congo and Syria and whatnot, and like as if I have to mention these things in order to mention the conflict in Gaza as atrocious and to mention the fact that my government supports it, and I resent that immensely. I resent what I'm being accused of either openly or tacitly. I resent the way that our rights are impinged by a foreign government in order to protect their ability to conquer other countries. It's a travesty. It is. It's entirely avoidable. There is no excuse for any of this. Ultra Orthodox Israelis tend to be against serving in a greater Israeli society to include military service. They tend to be sequestered in their own communities, much like they do here in the United States. Um, they spend a lot of time engaging in religious studies. They functionally collect welfare. What would replace the Netanyahu government after the collapse? Well, ostensibly it would be a liberal party, but it's a parliamentary system. So if there isn't as enough support for a new coalition, Likud would probably have to form a coalition government with someone else if that's possible. There's no immediate path to a government for anyone if this collapses. They'll probably have to hold elections. I don't see an immediate path. None of the Arab parties will join with Likud, and Likud wouldn't have them anyway. Obviously, the far right radicals will stick with them, but that won't be enough without the ultra orthodox. So, as far as this goes, what we know so far that has been more or less confirmed from MSNBC, written yesterday. On Tuesday morning, Israeli soldiers fired at crowds of Palestinians as they tried to approach a food distribution site in the south of Gaza. According to the Israeli military, at least 27 people were killed in the shooting, the Gaza Health Ministry and Red Cross reported. Well over 100 wounded. 2 days earlier, witnesses spoke with MSNBC NBC and said Israeli military fired on people in Gaza as they tried to reach an aid hub on Sunday. 31 people were killed in this one. Israel has denied responsibility for the deaths. Both events follow the rollout of a new aid plan that relies on Israel and US backed private aid organizations. Actually, it's just a single organization. No UN or any other humanitarian organization has been involved in this. They refuse to be because they see it as weaponizing aid, which it is. It would be weaponizing aid even if the Israelis were not firing into the crowds trying to get aid. The deliberate withholding of food from a population is not a tactic. It is not collateral damage. This is the U.S. Boston Consulting Group. It's cruelty, and when used as a tool of war under international law, it becomes a crime. What we are witnessing in Gaza is not merely a humanitarian crisis, it is a man made catastrophe, a siege that amounts to the forced starvation of over 2 million Palestinians, and it is a moral failure of the West's conscience. I have seen firsthand what a siege looks like. I was living in Gaza as a journalist in 2007, when, in response to Hamas winning elections the year before, Israel imposed this blockade on the entire territory. I saw the siege's brutal toll. I know what desperation does to people, what it means when children cry, not because they're afraid of bombs, but because their stomachs are empty. I've seen the despair and the grief on a father's face when he can't find medicines to save his sick children. But Gaza in 2025 represents something even more dire and more sinister. The systematic targeting of the very essentials of life in advance of a policy not to punish Palestinians, but as aid groups have warned, to advance Israelis' policy of ethnic cleansing. What's happening in Gaza is a crime that has been building for years, one that exposes that starvation and deprivation and collective punishment have long been part of Israel's policy towards the Palestinians. What we're seeing today is simply the most brutal, most public, and most lethal phase of a system that has existed for nearly 2 decades. Let's start with the facts. In 2007, after Hamas won elections and took control of Gaza, Israel and Egypt imposed a blockade on the entire territory. What followed wasn't just economic isolation. That year, the Israeli government commissioned an now infamous document known as the Red Lines Report. It was a deliberate strategy of controlled deprivation. They didn't just seal the borders, they calculated how many calories Palestinians in Gaza would need to avoid malnutrition and then restricted food imports to match. Trucks carrying lentils, pasta, and powdered milk were turned away, not because of security concerns, but because those items were not considered essential. That's not a conspiracy theory, it's documented policy. Dov Weiglass, an advisor to then Israeli PM Ehud Olmert, once even bragged that the goal was to put Palestinians on a diet, but not to make them die of hunger. The economy collapsed, water became undrinkable, electricity came and went, often available for only a few hours a day, hospitals barely functioned. Aid groups called it an open air prison, and yet the world kept looking away. The policy in 2007 was to keep the Gazan population on the edge of survival. The policy is to eradicate that today, and more genocide scholars and aid groups are concluding as such. Forced starvation and the establishment of a new aid mechanisms to drip feed Gaza is not about denying Hamas a lifeline. Cindy McCain, McCain's the late Senator McCain's wife said, is the head of the UN World Food Program. They have rejected the propaganda that Hamas is stealing aid. And yet, much of the world continues to look on in silence. Western capitals issue statements about concern, but continue to send Israel weapons while shielding it from sanctions. U.S. officials talk about the need for proportional response while turning a blind eye to Gaza's suffering. In any other context, any other country, this would be a scandal of unimaginable proportions. But when it comes to the Palestinians, because the West is complicit, it gives Israel a free pass and the Palestinians pay the price. This is all true. And it's not like we've been silent over the past year. I think we've been pretty open about criticizing Israel fairly for what's happening in Gaza, what they're doing in Gaza. And I think we've been pretty open in criticizing the United States for its involvement and how it stays involved. And this is the war of
Sorry,
Genghis.
everyone.
This is the warfare of Genghis Khan. It really is. It's despicable behavior. And I want to emphasize again, because I must in these discussions, because it comes up because of the abuse of Israel, of their relationship with, and Zionism's relationship with Judaism, that this isn't a failing of faith or a failing of ethnicity. This is a failing of people who have engaged in barbarity and tried to use their ethno-religious standing to cover it up and to shield themselves from criticism. And we've seen in the last 3 weeks rather, a number of high-profile attacks on Jewish Americans and protesters in the United States. And these are barbaric in and of themselves. These are anti-Semitic acts, and they're horrifying. But I am reminded of the time after 9/11, and I remember Muslims being attacked and Muslims being harassed. This is a thing that happens. Hate is a thing that happens, and it's unacceptable. I remember Sikhs were attacked because they wore turbans and were brown skinned and people thought they were Muslims. This is not a new phenomena, and it's not unexpected that the actions of others are transposed, and people who never had anything to do with it are held to account for things they've never done just because they happen to share a category with other people. And that's terrible too. And as much as Eli Rodriguez or the individual in Boulder bear responsibility for their actions, the culpability is not merely their own. The culpability is ours for allowing the situation to develop like this. The culpability is Israel's for engaging in this, for engaging in the rhetoric they have, for using their rhetoric in the way they have as well. And this is if this is not something you feel comfortable speaking out about, I suppose I can understand. But I want to point out to you that we talk a lot about what you would do when the Nazis came looking for your Jewish neighbors. And what you're doing right now is what you would have done then. That's just something I think we should all keep in mind.
What do you mean? I'm just asking, like, in what way? And are you referring to the audience, to us?
To everyone, to anyone who might be listening. What you're doing and what you're saying about Gaza now. And I would pull people like Bad Empanada, who I think is fucking terrible on Israel, who's an anti-Semite, by the way, who advocates the murder and the displacement and the ethnic cleansing of Israelis from Israel, as if the thing was who was being ethnically cleansed and not the very act of ethnic cleansing being wrong. I would include anyone who is calling for more violence, who is justifying taking away freedoms, and who is committing violence, and who is facilitating violence. This is what you would have done. This is how you would have collaborated, or whether you would have stayed silent, or what you would have done. Like, everyone wants to believe that they would have put Anne Frank up in their attic, and maybe you would have, but this doesn't seem... This is disheartening in a very real sense to me, because we have seen so much. We've seen the Holocaust. We study the Holocaust in school. Most of the people in this audience are within living memory of the Rwandan genocides, or Serbia. It's been long past time to speak out, if you haven't already. Any other context that we would phrase the current Zionist movement in Israel, we would phrase it as a racist supremacist movement. If Nick Fuentes gets up and says similar things, we call it white supremacism. When Professor Flowers had that conversation with Vosh, people rightly called it what it was, that it was advocating for genocide, just on the behalf of black supremacism. There's only one way that we're going to live in this world, and it's together. You can't make little camps of ethnic groups and expect there not to be violence and war. You can't make ethno-states and expect them to survive unchallenged, because ethnicities are fluid, ephemeral things. Who is what changes based on the mores of the time. And all you're doing, if you're advocating for that kind of thing, is you're setting up the seeds of future conflict, future strife and suffering. And there's no end to it. There's no, well, one day we shall get our revenge on the people who oppressed us, because the people who are you got revenge on will turn around and say, well, now we've been oppressed and now we shall come get revenge on you. And on it goes, because we've seen that. There's no final end to it. Just because you're on top right now doesn't mean you will remain so. So I have every sympathy. I do. I do. We've covered the October 7th attacks. We covered the UN
We
document on
try
that.
to we try to I'm sorry that there has been such minimal participation from me here, people. We really do try to be objective with everything. I think Daedalus and I definitely have somewhat different opinions on the conflict, but one thing that we can agree on, and I stand for it, it's not even so much, you know, what position I have on Israel as a whole. I support Israel's right to exist. I'm going to be absolutely honest with you on that, but I don't support genocide and mass violence on any scale. I don't support, and not that, you know, genocide has been proven there yet, but what I am seeing is really horrible for me. It makes me very ashamed, and you know, it's despicable because it's done with impunity. We try to be as balanced as we can with this. It's very hard to be objective sometimes, and it's, you know, hard for me to, I try to be as objective as I can with the Ukraine conflict. I'm going to be the first, you know, the most honest person with you in regards to it. I am not someone who's on Twitter like one of these NAFO people who are, you know, peddling any sort of cope or unrealistic prospects to how this conflict might play out. Granted, I don't know how it will, but, you know, I'm trying to be honest with you. And my own view of it is very cynical. My own view of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very cynical. And honestly, when I was able to kind of get over the shock of October 7th, it has been a conflict that has been very hard for me to follow because of how depressing it is. And I already, you know, have a lot emotionally invested in Ukraine.
Yeah, we've kind of bifurcated responsibilities, I think. You have paid a lot
Yeah.
more attention to Ukraine in the past couple months, and I've been focusing virtually exclusively on Israel,
Yeah.
and Palestine.
And that's good because it's really difficult for us, I think, emotionally to do both. You know, with the same level of, you know, detail, because it'll really, you know, that's the thing about being a historian is, you know, I study the Holocaust, I study genocide broadly, but, you know, specifically the Holocaust. And if you know, let your work, you don't even sometimes while doing your work realize the impact that it has on you until later on. You know, and I realized that, you know, reading about this shit will affect you in profound ways. So I actually caution all of you to get too immersed in this. Follow it. It's your duty to follow. I think current events, it's your duty to especially follow, you know, events that, you know, are involve a tremendous amount of human suffering. It's your duty to be aware of it, but be careful with how much you expose yourself to it. And that's a warning I'm going to give you here because it does take a toll.
yeah, I fully invite you to come listen to us pontificate on things. Obviously, I'm a preachy little son of a bitch, but uh, we are coming up to the 1 hour mark. There is a couple things in the pipeline right now. If you are a regular viewer of President Sunday, you will know that he has announced a history reading series of seminars about colonialism. We will be participating in this. Uh, More details to follow as soon as we have finished planning it behind the scenes. There'll be a number of books on offer and a number of channels involved. Us, obviously, Two Guys Talking History. Shakespeare is involved. Lucy Haze, uh, and Sanzi. I remember his name. I swear to God, I remember his name. He just haven't been around much lately. Uh, all of which are taking different books and covering different topics about the formation of European colonialism, empire, but pre-modern. No, not pre-modern. Actually, early modern empires. Excuse me. I am technically accurate. And whatnot. So if you're not in the Cathedral Discord, and I will actually pop a link in right now to chat because I'm a moderator there and have powers. Stay tuned for more details on that. They will be listed out as we're going to build a master playlist, but like the initial ones are going to be member only on Sunday's channel, and then they will be for free on all the other channels that do them. So that should be interesting and exciting. It's a big collaborative project. It will be hopefully a lot of fun. I will be back Sunday night. I don't know if Hetman will. That depends on his schedule. And we'll be covering lighter topics, uh, some history stuff, some React stuff, as opposed to current events. And finally, we are going to accelerate next month essay production so that we start getting things out that we need to get out. I'm sitting on like 4 scripts, mostly finished. I just have to sit down and record them and do them. And so, with that, I am gonna thank you all for coming out tonight. Hetman, stay in the thing. I'm gonna play the music that didn't work at the beginning. We're not covering the John Spencer debate. No, bad jumped. I'm gonna play the music, and then we gotta wrap something up real quick. That's all.
Is John Spencer that white supremacist?
No, John Spencer is the idiot that's taking up breathing oxygen at a West Point think tank, telling everyone that Israel is killing less civilians than ever before in any war ever
Wait,
because he
is
doesn't.
is he? Okay,
He's the
okay,
guy.
yeah.
He's the guy who published a pamphlet for Ukrainians to fight tanks by shooting paintballs at their periscopes. He's the urban warfare expert. He's a fucking moron. And on that happy note, I wish you all a very good night. Got 3 minutes of music. Stick around.